So let's talk about what the approval process is to get insurance in a wildfire prone area like we are, here in the Front Range foothills. And we're talking about the area that we generally serve. So Conifer, Evergreen, the Morrison foothills, Pine, Bailey, Genesee, this whole area. We are in what's called the wildland urban interface, meaning that we are in an area of higher fire danger, arguably number one in the country. And with that comes some risk. So how do we, or what's the insurance process of getting appraised or an approval, whether it's underwriting or a site visit? Like, tell us a little bit more about how you guys respectively go through that process, understanding there's other companies, they all have their own process too.
For most companies, they do have an approval process up here in the wildfire risk areas. When you initially, and this is kind of across the board with most insurance companies, when you first call in to get a quote and they ask you your address and you get told no, that is what I refer to as a hard no. And that is meaning that you don't meet our first line of underwriting. You don't meet some insurance companies go by what's called the fire line score. Some insurance companies go by what's called a brush score. And there's different other measurements or different third-party vendors that provide this information that insurance companies use. And that's the first underwriting guideline. So if your address does not meet the current requirements of that insurance company, that's where you get the hard no. If you do get a yes, that means that each individual company has their own underwriting guidelines beyond that. So whether that's like our current guidelines or no trees can be within 5 feet of the foundation or attached structure. Some other insurance companies can be 20 feet. So that approval would be with each insurance company and exactly what they are wanting. Most insurance companies also do an inspection. So you have, once they say yes, then you get through that first approval. Once the policy is enforced, they will send out an inspector. Sometimes it's a third-party inspector, and that is also where they can come back and say, hey, you need to trim these trees up. We don't like this tree next to your house. We don't like this bush. We want you to have mesh material underneath your deck. And I mean, the list can really go on, but that's really the approval process. The hard no comes from the third-party vendor of how high of a risk your house is. If it fits within the risk that the company wants to take, you have that next area where the underwriting looks at it and go, yep, we will accept you. And then you have the third-party inspection done.
Got it.
And I'll also kind of jump in here on that. One of the things that I think important for folks who are living up here who might find themselves in the need of insurance is that we have a remarkable cohort of other agents who are friendly and collaborative, who work together to try to do right by the customer. And so oftentimes if somebody does reach out to us, just as Dusty mentioned, there may be a criteria that for us is not acceptable, but for farmers might be. And so I'll say, hey, why don't you reach out to Dusty? She's amazing. She'll take great care of you because their criteria might be a little bit different. And so don't just take it personally. Number one, that I know that's hard. Lots of folks are like, but I've never made a claim. I pay my bill on time. And just as she mentioned, there is that first criteria that purely based on the address and the location and factors that they're looking at. It's not a desirable policy to underwriting initially. And so we're absolutely always willing to help connect folks to somebody who might be able to help them because things do vary from carrier to carrier to carrier. And then to kind of go into some of those.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
To kind of go into some of those other items you have noted on there, once it gets past that initial approval and if a fire survey is required or an inspection piece is required, there are other factors. And like you've noted at the top, the applicant's credit rating. And so kind of getting into that, each of those next steps of acceptability for a certain company, those are things they're looking at, including that loss history. And so I think one of the other slides that we'll kind of touch base on later in the webinar mentions a little bit about being mindful of claims. And so maybe I'll speak to that with regards. I think the question says, am I going to be canceled if I file a claim?
Yeah.
All of those things are relevant. And so again, your agent who you currently have, it can be a great resource and should be one of those trusted advisors that you rely on for these types of questions that pop up. With regards to, taking folks through that fire survey, we try to do a really good job of setting expectations about here's kind of what they're going to be looking for. If you've got all these beautiful aspen leaves sitting in your gutters that just fell off the tree last week, somebody's going to come out and look at that. And so before they do, let's be mindful and let's clean those gutters. They're going to be looking for hardscape 5 feet out. If you've got some beautiful bushes, we probably want to make adjustments there. And so kind of setting up that expectation on the front end. So help me help you. How can we get through this process together to get to that issuance?
And the
So
biggest,
how often do the underwriters look at, say, satellite images, and then maybe that's old and the homeowner says, but I've done all this mitigation work. Should they make sure they're telling you so that you can verify and they're not relying on old data or old pictures?
Absolutely. And that's where that partnership comes in. Getting somebody through that issuance, it's a conversation that our office has with underwriting every day, all day sometimes. And so coming back and saying, the surveyor felt like this tree was too close to the house, but really I walked the property and it's 15 feet out and that's within the guidelines. I can go out and take another picture with a tape measure and kind of show you that. So it is absolutely having those conversations with the agency and kind of making sure that the information is correct. Most agents will kind of do that on their part to say, here's what came back on the survey as concerns. Do we feel like this is accurate? Are there differences there that we can adjust? And so it's that partnership to get you across that finish line.
the other major things that I see tagged in my inspections, and it's right around this time of every year, is your wood piles and wood against the house. And so like our guidelines is the wood pile has to be 30 feet from your dwelling. And they do not want wood setting up on your deck or next to your house at all. And so that gets tagged a lot on my inspections.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, Dusty, tell me about what a fire line risk score is. Like, what does that mean? And it feels like it's always changing, but what does that look like in your world?
So each insurance company goes by a different risk score. Farmers is the one that we use, the fire line risk. But there are other companies that use what's called the brush score. And essentially, where it doesn't matter where the insurance company is pulling them from, it is pulled from a third-party vendor. That third-party vendor typically gets that number from satellite images. So a fire line score is made up of your slope, your access, and your fuel score. Your fuel score is not your property line. Your fuel score can be an area around your house. And I really don't even know the dimensions, like how far out they go, but it is not your property line. Your access is your road private or is it public? Is it plowed? Is it wide enough for a fire truck? Is there switchbacks to the point that a fire truck wouldn't make it up to your house? So all of that stuff kind of plays in that number. The brush score, from my understanding, is it takes your fire line score and your protection class score and kind of combines them. So they know if you have a water source or how far you are from a fire department. These third-party vendors that are providing this, there is no regulations or guidelines that they go by. The only thing that's regulated is essentially what insurance companies do with them. So they report to us. Dora kind of gives us guidelines on what we can do with them. And then that's how we base the risk. But there's no guidelines in regards to how they get their numbers. You can have two houses, same exact houses have two different numbers. And there's no way of going back to these third-party vendors to get anything changed. And that's what's causing that hard no at the very beginning when you first request a quote is these numbers that are coming from these third-party vendors.
Now, what I will share is that we had a community forum. It was like 3 days after the Corey fire started, which was in July of 2024, over at Evergreen Fire and Rescue, their main station in Evergreen. And House Representative Tammy Story was there as a host, as well as our County Commissioner Leslie Dahlkemper, and the room was packed, right? I mean, we could smell smoke. It was top of mind, talking about insurance. And two of the other guests that were there, I was on a panel, were from the Division of Insurance from the state of Colorado. And they did say that one of their hot buttons right now is trying to look at what all the different industries are doing, or all the different carriers are doing for their risk scores, and trying to make it uniform. Because, you know, what State Farm is going to recommend versus Farmers is going to be different than all the other carriers that are out there. And the homeowner is shaking their head like, well, what am I supposed to be doing, right? I want to make sure that I'm doing the right thing to protect my home, but also all these different carriers are telling me different things. So I will say, from what I learned at that session a few months ago, is that it is top of mind for the state to try to have some uniformity when it comes to this, because it can be super confusing, right? So
kind of along those lines, to kind of piggyback on that overarching topic, you know, one of the things that I have seen, which is remarkable, is the coming together of many different entities to look at this problem. I mean, you've got the legislative piece, you've got the fire department, who has done an amazing job with their ambassador program, and you know, the variety of things that they're offering. You've got all these people that for the first time are kind of coming together to have a conversation for the better. And so I'm absolutely thrilled by that. You know, the piece that insurance can have in that conversation, I think, is relevant. But I definitely think, because of our area and the unique situation that we are finding ourselves in, with the difficulty of getting insurance, the cost of it, it is starting that conversation that I think is so important. And so I think as time goes on, we can't help but see some great things come out of that.